Now then, as we've heard, the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, believes the EU could still adjust free movement of people in such a way that Britain could then remain inside the EU. And he's also admitted that the policy of open borders he so enthusiastically pursued in government is no longer appropriate. But whatever its flaws or merits, isn't this, as we've just heard, an idea that has simply come too late? Mr. Blair joins me now. And I guess we could start with that. It's an interesting idea, but there are numerous hurdles, not least that we have now voted to leave the EU, and that is that.
Yeah, and I completely understand that. And what Michael Fallon's just said to you now is a perfectly sensible view. It's to say, look, the British people have taken this decision, and therefore there's no way out of it. What I'm trying to say is, and you could see this in some of what he was saying to you, this decision is life-changing for this country. And this is a moment when every member of Parliament, including the people like Michael Fallon, who frankly believe that Britain's better off in Europe and not out of it, have got to see if there is a way of meeting people's legitimate grievances and anxieties that gave rise to that Brexit vote, but do it in a way that doesn't undermine the economy of the society and the country and its standing in the world. So what I'm trying to do with this immigration paper that my institute's published today is have a comprehensive look at European immigration, say there are ways of controlling European immigration that don't mean you have to do Brexit. And then, by the way, you can concentrate on non-EU immigration, which I think is actually a bigger concern for most people.
OK, and a lot of people already this morning have said it's a little bit rich coming from you, given how you opened the doors back in the 2000s to mass immigration and changed lots of communities.
Right, so first of all, we shouldn't exaggerate this, by the way. In 2004, we could have imposed transitional arrangements on those accession countries, the 8 countries. Actually, the majority of EU migration since 2004 has been from outside of those countries. And we would still have had freedom of movement, if not freedom to work. But the real point is, the situation back then was different. Look, when I left office in 2007, the economy was strong. There was no National Health Service winter crisis. The health service satisfaction levels were at record points. Educational attainment was rising. Crime was falling, right. Inequality was narrowing. 2017, post-financial crisis, post-austerity, no, you've got to listen to what people are saying and react to it.
But we did have hundreds of thousands of people coming into this country after that decision quite quickly. And lots of communities up and down the country, all up and down the East Coast, for instance, parts of the Midlands, the Black Country, were changed very, very fast. And people didn't understand that.
Yep.
And the question, I suppose, is, do you accept that among all the reasons for the Brexit vote, that was part of it?
I accept that EU migration, including from those accession countries, was obviously a factor. I do think it probably isn't the biggest concern on immigration, but here's what I'm saying now, because we're not 13 years ago. With 2017, the circumstances are completely different, and we've had the Brexit vote. If, for example, the anxiety is downward pressure on wages as a result of an influx of EU migrants coming and doing work, say, in the construction industry, we have it within our power to deal with that by domestic legislation. In addition, for example, now there is a directive being supported by the French president that would specifically bar the undercutting of wages and local bargaining from EU migration. So if we want to deal with those questions, we can deal with them without the sledgehammer that, as it were, through Brexit, destroys the EU migration that we'll actually need, because my paper shows that we actually need most of these EU migrants. And it doesn't, of course, deal with the other parts of the immigration issue, which I think are the greater concern.
But nonetheless, the British people voted to take back control of their borders. So any change in internal EU migration would have to be quite a dramatic one. Can I ask you whether you see any sign whatever that any of the leaders of the EU or the national leaders are prepared to revisit what is one of the 4 pillars of the EU free movement?
I think there are signs, and I've just given you one, which is specifically dealing with this issue of undercutting of wages. I think you could go back and argue in Europe today for example, an emergency brake that didn't just deal with benefits, but also deal with the influx of people. And I think there are things that we could do domestically, like registering people who come in and those that go out. I think you could probably get a restriction on those that come. We tried to do
this in 2016 under David Cameron and failed.
But this is post the Brexit vote. And the thing that I'm saying is that, you know, at the moment, you either do leave Brexit, as Michael Fallon's just been saying to you, even though, does he really think it's a smart thing to do? No, he doesn't, but he feels he has to. Or we have the status quo. I'm trying to say this. In the end, Brexit is a distraction, not a solution to the problems this country faces. If members of Parliament really believe that, then their obligation is to set out solutions that deal with the actual problems communities and people have, and not do Brexit, which is actually going to distract us from those solutions and going to cause real economic and political damage.
When you observe these negotiations, which are not going terribly smoothly at the moment, and you've been to see Mr. Juncker and warmly embraced him and so forth, whose side are you on?
I'm always on the side of Britain. But the question is, what's in the British interest? And in my view...
Have you offered any advice or help to the Brexit team on the British side?
No, but I'm very happy to. But they probably wouldn't want my advice, because what I would be saying to them is enlarge the options. Look, just understand what the problem of Europe is with the British position, because it's really important people understand this. For over 3 decades, British governments, under Margaret Thatcher, under John Major, under me, have been arguing 2 great causes in Europe. One is the single market, make Europe not a federal superstate, but a bigger economic market, bring more prosperity to European people. And the other is enlargement of the European Union. You've just been talking to Michael Fallon and Jens Stoltenberg about the dangers of Russia. Think if we hadn't brought those East European countries into the European Union. So these are the 2 big causes for 30 years Britain's fought for. They're now the reasons, apparently, we want to leave. So,
and we have decided to leave. That is the thing I keep coming back to. We have taken the decision. The vote's been out. It was a democratic vote. There was more than 1 million people in the majority, and that is going to happen unless something really dramatic changes. And I want to take you on to how you could get the second referendum that I think you want. Because you look at the House of Commons and you ask which of the parties is going to call for a second referendum, and you look around scratching your head in vain.
Yeah, so here's the thing that I think each member of Parliament's got to do at the moment, is to look at this decision in a different category from the normal decision where you obey the party whip or, you know, any ordinary piece of legislation. This is a decision that really changes the destiny of this country for generations.
You're saying go out and rebel for Britain.
No, I'm saying this. I'm saying if you believe there is a better way through, and I'm trying to suggest, and we'll publish more papers over the next months, there are better ways of dealing with the country's problems than Brexit, then at least try and explain that to the country. Find the leadership within yourself to say to people, there is a different and better way. Now, if the country doesn't change its mind, I've always accepted. If there isn't a change, then Brexit will go forward. What I'm saying to those in positions of political leadership and those members of Parliament at the moment is, guys, this is not an ordinary decision. So make this make this one where you're prepared to go out, and if you think that there is a different and better way, put it before people and argue for it.
But I'm interested in what actually is going to happen, how you achieve this. Now, Lord Adonis, Andrew Adonis, a former close colleague of yours, suggests today that the House of Lords could have an amendment to this legislation saying it can't go ahead in the end without a second referendum. And that would then come to the House of Commons. Now, in those circumstances, is that really what you're calling for, is members of the House of Commons to vote for a second referendum?
No, I'm calling for something prior to that, because before you get to that, this thing will go ahead unless it starts to become obvious that the public is having second thoughts, that when they see what leaving the single market and customs union means, that they start to say, well, actually,
is there a different... It hasn't become obvious yet, has it?
No, it hasn't become obvious yet, but maybe if we, who are in politics, either in Parliament or outside of Parliament, put this case to people, maybe they will listen. If they don't, I accept it goes forward. But here's the other thing we've got to remember about the referendum. We voted for Brexit without knowing what the terms of the alternative relationship are.
Well, I think it's had to. There's no way of knowing what the alternatives were.
Exactly,
really.
There's no way of knowing, and we've learned a lot since then. My point, again, is very simple. As the government comes to look at the terms of Brexit, surely it's a very common sense thing to say that we take our final irrevocable decision once we see what the alternative is. Because, you know, to use the old house swap analogy, we agreed to swap our house, but we haven't yet seen what the other place looks like. If when we see it, the country has a change of mind, then surely it's entitled to have that change of mind.
Except that we have signed the contract, which was Article 50. So in terms of the house buying thing, the deal is going through at the moment. Now, can I ask you about...
Yeah, well, we've not looked at the alternative terms. And by the way, let's be very clear. Brexit, in my view, is very, very damaging for Britain. It's damaging for Europe. If you look at all these...
But if your immigration plan, your alternative offer on immigration is to actually happen, then the EU has effectively to come to us and say, we have got this great new idea which might keep you in. Yeah. And there is no sign of that whatever. Well, in fact, Macron and Merkel have both said the 4 pillars are sacrosanct, we're not going to touch them, don't even think about it.
Yeah, but what they're saying is you shouldn't abandon freedom of movement, and you shouldn't, by the way, because it actually has a beneficial impact. You can restrict it, and you can qualify it, and this is not just a question of Europe coming to us. Again, as I say, if we had sensible political leadership right now, we would also be going to Europe and saying, here are a range of different options. So let's investigate each one of them. And the whole purpose of this is to be in a situation where if, for example, the country then finally decides, look, we want to do this, it's more important than anything else, fine, there's nothing I or anyone else can do. I'm just, in a sense, with a renewed sense of mission on this, because I think for future generations, this is a decision of such moment and importance that we've at least got to be prepared to argue the case.
Not a renewed sense of mission, please. Anyway, let me ask you about another thing you say in this article. Again and again, you say that there are senior doubters inside the government. Now, we know that Philip Hammond and others have not been enthusiastic about Brexit, but you're implying that there are actually Brexiteers who have changed their mind as they've seen the way the negotiations are going.
Well, I think there may or may not be that. No, I was meaning more the people who voted Remain and are now, as Michael Fallon's just been saying to you, we got no option. We're just bound, we've got to carry on. What I'm saying to them is, look, if there's a different and better way that you can meet people's concerns, particularly on the issue of immigration, as I say, because Brexit only affects EU immigration, it doesn't affect the rest of the immigration picture. If there's a different and better way, articulate it, argue for it.
None of us are pitch-perfect soothsayers. Is it possible that Brexit might work very well for this country?
You see, I think the only circumstances in which Brexit works, and this is the fantasy of the real Brexiteers, they are, in one sense, right, that if you leave Europe, Britain should become a light touch, light regulation. It should become marketed...
Join NAFTA.
Right, it should become marketed as not Europe. The risk is the British people won't vote for that. They're not going to vote for the huge economic and social restructuring, to the changes to the health service and other things that would require. And the risk is, actually, that we have a Brexit followed by, I'm afraid, an unreconstructed leftist programme from Labour. And if you combine those two things together, in my view, we will be in a very serious situation as a country. And therefore, this is why this is not just about Brexit, by the way. It's about how does the centre ground of British politics recover its traction and show that there is a change that we can make to our country that really deals with its problems and doesn't go down the false path of either old-fashioned programmes of left or right.
And yet, like many people, you were completely wrong about Jeremy Corbyn. You said that if he was elected as Labour leader, there would be a meltdown, a catastrophe of the Labour Party. In fact, he turned out to be very, very popular and won nearly as many votes, dare I say so, as you did in your first campaign.
Yeah, and you know, again, what I've said to people is, I take my hat off to the way he fought the campaign and to the enthusiasm he generated. But it doesn't make that programme right. And, you know, I still think there are many millions of people in the country who want a way forward that makes the changes that make our country fairer, that gives a heightened degree of support for social justice and for greater social cohesion, but does so in a way that is modern and progressive and not backward-looking, either by going anti-immigrant on the right or anti-business on the left.
Before the summer break, there was a lot of talk about a new political party to represent those kind of centre, outward-looking values you're talking about. Is that now for the birds? Is it gone, that idea?
Well, look, I've never been wanting a new political party. I want the Labour Party to come back to a position where I think it can win an election.
It ain't going to. It's not going to, is it?
Well, at the moment, it doesn't look like it. But
therefore,
it doesn't really matter what I say or what anyone else says. I can just tell you this. There is a huge amount of political energy out there in the country that is searching for a home. Now, if the two main parties don't give it a home, it's going to search for a different home. It doesn't matter what I say or what anyone else says.
But somebody will create a new party to channel that energy.
I honestly don't know. But
because if they don't, all of this is, with respect, meaningless, isn't it?
Well,
people have to vote for something.
In the end, yes, they do have to vote for something. But the one thing I would say about present-day politics, and as I always say to people, I'm a student of politics again, because I accept there are things that I've not understood about the current situation politically. But the volatility of politics is its principal characteristic at the moment. And yes, we had Donald Trump and we had Brexit, but we also had Macron in France.
And just going back to Corbyn, who said it would be a disastrous programme, he has picked up on a huge amount of anger which is real. Lots and lots of people have seen their incomes going down. Lots of young people see nowhere to live and see no prospect of hope for themselves. There is a lot of anger in this country about the effect of what they call neoliberal economics, which happened on your watch as well.
Yeah, so if you combine Brexit with the Corbyn programme, unreconstructed, then I think we've got a serious problem, as I've said before. Yes, there's a lot of anger, but give people an answer. So there are answers to the anger. There are answers on tuition fees, on social injustice, on communities left behind. What should we be dealing with as a country today? The technological revolution, infrastructure, making sure that we're geared up to the enormous changes that are coming down the pipe at us. Brexit on the one side, anti-business, old-fashioned leftist programs on the other. They may ride the anger, but they don't provide the answer.
A very geared up Tony Blair. We've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Now then.